we wanted to also frame a little bit of what Daryl's talk is in our local context. And so we have two panelists for you tonight. And the first panelist is Beth Crownover from the Field Museum. And Beth is the Director of Education at the Field Museum. And she's been there for over 15 years, so clearly we have lots of experience here. And Beth, we always love to integrate early childhood with the work that's going on at the museums, because as Daryl so beautifully pointed out, what the learning sciences teach us about what high quality early childhood education looks like, it always reminds me of, well, that's what goes on in great informal museum settings. So Beth's gonna share with us a little bit about how she supports learning at the museum. And then Kim Cole, who has been my partner in preparing teachers at UIC now for, I don't know, I feel like close to 20 years, is the director of the UIC Children's Center. And those of you who don't know the UIC Children's Center or haven't ever been there, be sure to give Kim Cole a call one day and go for a visit, because it's a fabulous and dynamic place to see what's great instruction and teaching going on with young children right here on our campus. And so Kim's going to talk a little bit about an experiment that she did with kids at the center. So Beth, you want to come on up?
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, I'm going to talk really briefly because I'm not as interesting as the first speaker, but I wanted to take a couple minutes just to talk about kind of the intersection between inquiry learning and object-based learning, and how informal organizations like the Field Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry and the Chicago Children's Museum, all of the informal organizations that are at your fingertips here in the Chicago area, can help facilitate that kind of learning. So this first slide is a little academic, I realize, but we've been having a lot of conversations at the museum about what does learning look like at the Field Museum? Because learning looks different at any institution that you go to, at any organization you go to, in any classroom you go to, learning looks different. So for us at the Field Museum, what we want to really focus on is learning is about developing critical thinking and the ability to explore like a scientist. So as you look at this, we have critical thinking in the center, and really thinking about how we impact the audience as much as possible in getting to that critical thinking piece. And we have a number of different ways that help support that. And you'll see kind of and this is my Venn diagram, people. This Venn diagram and I were in a fight for hours, so, oh my Lord. So you'll see this kind of dotted line, the ellipse that's going around the Venn diagram, and that represents the collections at the museum, because the museum is founded on its collections. That's what makes us unique. That's what sets us apart from all of our wonderful colleague institutions, but it also gives us the ability to work in concert with those colleague institutions and with you. And so every aspect of learning that we try to facilitate at the institution and convene at the institution is around our objects. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then as we look at the other circles in the Venn diagram, thinking about what type of space is necessary for engaging in that critical thinking, what kind of capacity or agency building can take place, and that can take place with every learner, doesn't matter what the age is. And then what kind of action and inquiry do we want to take place? So what's that science that's coming into play when we think about the science that our researchers are doing at the institution? So as we think about critical thinking, and this I give a nod to my colleagues in the back of the room from MSI, Brett and Marilyn are both here. Wave, Brett and Marilyn, there they are. So I wanted to show this is a great graphic to talk about, well, what do we mean when we think about inquiry learning as we get to that critical thinking piece, right? Because all of those skills in inquiry learning help get to critical thinking, help get to that area where, in those videos that Dr. Greenfield showed, where those students are really active and really thinking about what it is they're doing, and those hands are on and those minds are on at the same time. And this is a project that we're currently conducting, and we're getting ready to actually complete in its 5th year that PNC funded. But it's looking at how to create a level of comfort with preschool teachers in science in the classroom, and then how does that translate into interactions with the families. So if you think about that student at the center, the family is on one end, the teacher is on the other end. We hope that that inquiry learning then is coming in and impacting it from both ways. So that project looked at how do you facilitate professional development that leads into a community of practice for educators over 5 years, and how do you take interactions with the families in the environment that they're used to seeing in their classrooms, in their schools, and bring that together so that then the teachers feel comfortable facilitating those activities with the families going into the 4th and 5th years. So it's very similar to the slides that you've previously seen. When we think about inquiry learning, we think about questioning and observing and predicting and comparing and classifying and documenting. And again, all of these things go across your day. They aren't just relegated to one particular area. So you can think about, how would you ask your students to document this experiment that they just conducted with the ladybugs? What type of picture would they draw of the ladybug when they first got it and as they started to take it apart? Similar to, how would you ask them to think through what type of plant or organism they would like to study that they would like to see change and grow? How do they document that? What types of drawings do they make? How do they use their language skills? And so thinking through these particular skill sets as we get to critical thinking. The other piece that I think is absolutely fantastic about science, and especially science with the ages that you guys are with day in and day out, is that it's a process. The process is not linear. It is not what we thought of when we were in school, where it's a scientific method and you go from creating your hypothesis to testing your investigation, and it's very neat and tidy. Science does not come all wrapped up with a bow in a very pretty box. The process starts, it stops, it starts again, it stalls. You might go back to compare and contrast something completely different than you did before, and that's okay, because the learning is still taking place, and that's what's fantastic about it. And I think what's great about what we can do specifically at our institution is we have tools that we can provide to educators, but we also have professional development resources that we can provide to educators, so that these types of learning experiences can happen in the institution, like in the Crown Family Play Lab or in the other exhibitions that we have. But you can also take those objects that are so precious to us and that are at the center of the learning that we conduct, and you can take them into your classroom. So I don't know, is anybody familiar with the Harris Learning Collection? Yay, great, thank you, everybody. So the Harris Learning Collection actually is the oldest program at the museum. It's 100 years old, which is pretty old. We're really lucky it was endowed. We actually shuttered the program in fall of 2011, and we reopened it in 2012, and we did that because it's 100 years old, and the pedagogical approaches to some of the learning that was going on in the exhibit cases and the experience boxes might have been a little out of date. If you're a regular user, you know they were out of date. So what we did is we took the next generation science standards and we paired them with the inquiry learning skills that have been discussed this evening. And we reiterated some of the learning that's going on in terms of the instruction with these materials. So if you're not familiar with the learning collection, let's see if I can use this. This is not my strong suit. Yeah, okay, good. So it is composed of two different types of materials. There's these exhibit cases. We have about 900 of those. And then experience boxes that are on the bottom. The exhibit cases actually are kind of 3-foot square cases that range the gamut of animals to geology, botanicals, anthropological materials. They're all in their own environments. They have these really interesting panels on the side that'll pop out. And what we did in changing and updating these materials is that we have a template now whereby there are guiding questions that are on those panels. There are things that children might ask about: what does this animal eat? Where does this animal live? If it's an animal box. On the back side of that, there are more guiding questions that, again, gets to that really deep level of communication and conversation that you can have with the students. The experience boxes, there's 70 different types of experience boxes. They range all of the different areas that we study at the museum. They are all filled with real artifacts and specimens. They all have activity guides in them that help kind of spurn some ideas for educators to use in their classrooms. And they're also mapped to kind of grade levels. The reason why we did that is when we went through and updated the collection is that we utilized a very, very special core of teachers called field ambassadors. There's about 450 field ambassadors at the museum, and we utilize them in a number of different capacities. And with this particular collection, they assisted us in updating the materials. And so we had 300 surveys, thank God, that they completed that told us what age they taught, what boxes they used the most, why, how it aligned best with their curricula. And so we utilized that information and then realigned the experience boxes so that we knew, all right, ancient cultures is a sweet spot for 5th and 6th grade, so we're going to focus on 5th and 6th grade when we think about the activities that are going to align with those particular boxes, and so on. The other great thing about these pieces is they're totally interchangeable. You could pick out 3 different exhibit cases that relate to animals in a particular ecosystem, and you could take an experience box that it's illustrative of a culture that might have been found traditionally in that ecosystem, and you can pair those together to create a really wonderful dynamic space within your classroom that the students can completely explore on their own, and you can help seed those questions as they begin their investigations with the objects. So it's a great way, if you can't make it to the museum on a regular field trip, this is a way to bring the field trip into the museum on a regular basis. And we offer drop-in professional development sessions on a monthly basis on Saturdays. They're all free, and they all talk about how to learn with collections and how to pair it with the science in your classroom. So as you think about how you want to start to conduct some of these investigations and how you want to have conversations with kindergarten and first grade teachers about how you want to align with the NGSS, this is a perfect resource to use because it's ready-made and you can roll it into your classroom and you can roll it right up into the kindergarten and first grade classrooms as well and beyond. So thank you for having me. I'm going to hand it over to you again. Yes? Okay.
I'm going to talk a little bit about natural science, and I want to set it up a little bit. I'm the director at the Children's Center, so I don't actually have a classroom, and we're a small program, so we have 3 classrooms and 1 long hall. And when Darren was talking about what do you guys already do and what are kids interested in, pumpkins is what's happening in all of your classrooms right now. And so about 3 weeks ago, I posed a question which was I'm wondering if I can grow a new pumpkin inside a pumpkin. And so we literally just cut it open, put in dirt, and this sits outside my office. So parents are coming through, and that was one of my goals also, was to help parents to be involved in this scientific thinking and in helping their children. So the first thing we did was I asked kids, I introduced, we call them juicy words, of a hypothesis. What is your hypothesis? Do you think it can happen? And so everybody wrote on Post-it notes and made a graph of yes and no, and you can see we have many more yeses than nos. And at the top, I think this is a really important piece for the parents, was, you can see it up at the top there, but it was how do you extend your child's thinking? So some questions that parents could be asking as they revisited the pumpkin, because as Daryl said, it takes a long time for things to grow. And also down here in the corner here is just a little note that I wrote to the parents that this isn't supposed to be homework for you. This is supposed to be fun. If your child is not into this every single day, that's okay. You don't have to stand there and make them count or do all those things. But if your kid is into it, awesome. It does take a long time for these things to grow. So we also had to start, to keep their interest along the side there, I started counting how many days were we waiting. And I had one friend who was into this every single day. And what you can't see on that previous slide is we also had a magnifying glass. So there was a lot of talk and looking at the seeds. And he found the tiniest of sprouts. He was the first one, so we documented him on that. And then he found the second one, so that was very cool. Oh. And then, lo and behold, about 10 days later, you can grow a pumpkin inside a pumpkin. And now all of a sudden, everyone visits the pumpkin. It's growing! I was right! I said yes! And so we began talking about what do you call these different parts? Is this, and I learned so many things from just talking to the kids about what they really understand and don't understand. I was very surprised that when I asked them what those green things on the top were going to be, not a single child told me leaves. That was going to be the pumpkin, and it really told me where they were developmentally. That was a piece of assessment as to what they understood. And you can see in there what the roots looked like. So we took one out and we sort of began talking about that. What are the leaves? What are the stems? And then another really interesting thing, I don't know if I have it on the next slide. Oh yeah, it's very hard to tell, or maybe you can tell on the other ones, and I just can't really see it here. But all of a sudden kids started asking me, it's melting. It's getting mushy. It smells gross. That's pretty much what I'm feeling in my office at this moment, is that it's smelling really gross. Why? And at first, I thought, well, I have to have an answer. It's rotting. Well, what's rotting? Well, I spent the entire day at my computer trying to figure out how to explain rotting to 3- and 4-year-olds. And when you look up the definition, decomposing. Well, that didn't really help me. And it took me a little bit of time to think about it to realize that they'd already come up with the answer. That it was mushy, that it smelled icky, that it was sort of looked like it was melting. And we actually just had a conversation today about why does that happen? And that it's not growing anymore. Well, why not? What do pumpkins need to grow? So there were lots of these conversations. And I think in early childhood, especially around science, we tend to pigeon ourselves in times of the year because we don't think about planting and growing in the fall. We save all those activities to the spring. But now we have this. And now the new challenge is, can we keep it growing? Tomorrow we're going to put it into a bigger pot with some dirt because I have a friend who comes down every day and says, Kim, it's sunny, so we have to get it because now it needs light. And this is Jason, the guy who found all the sprouts. And we also added, in order to keep them coming and to help them, we added the little ruler. So there's, so they come in and they compare how tall is it today, how many sprouts are there. And it gives the parents a very structured way to begin to talk about this, to feel involved with the kids. And we have a lot of research parents, so they like the idea of a hypothesis. And the funniest piece in all of this to me is now that it's grown, how many parents have stopped by your office and gone, I didn't think that was going to work. Well, guess what? It did. So I encourage you, this is a very fun one. If you are going to try it, my tip for you is take a screwdriver and shove holes in the back of it. Because what I saw early on was when we watered it, and it doesn't take a lot of water, the water sits at the top. So you need it to drain. And that became well, why are there holes in it? Well, watch what happens. So there's a lot, there are a lot of ways to do that. Pinterest is your friend. That's where this came from. There are so many wonderful science activities on Pinterest. Go, and that's our, and we'll, our goal is to see if we can keep it going till the spring when we can put it in our garden. I don't know about that, but we're gonna try. We're gonna see. Thank you.
And before we jump into the questions, because I always have my teacher hat on and I'm always looking around out at all the teachers and future teachers out here, I have to make a comment on something that Kim said that sort of has my mind thinking as I'm listening to all of this stuff, because I know in my experience of working with preschool teachers, it's not that we don't like engaging kids in inquiry, and it's not that we don't like having conversations with kids and responding to their questions and asking their questions. There is a little bit of that worry inside, though, that sometimes those questions are going to come that are going to be questions that we feel like we can't answer. And I know Daryl made mention of that and how that's part of the scientific process, that we figure out how to find the answers to the questions together. But I wanted to point out to everyone what Kim so eloquently said about thinking about how am I going to explain what rotten means to children. And she's online trying to think about what it means from an adult perspective, and thinking how am I going to take this concept that I'm struggling with to even understand as an adult perspective, scientific concept, and explain it to 3- and 4-year-olds. And she had the brilliant aha moment, which is the one that I have to repeat because I think it's a brilliant aha moment. No, the kids already told me what rotten meant. And so it's their definitions and their ideas. And I think that that was a really important piece of this. And I hope that as you're thinking about science, and one of the questions on here is saying, well, what about 2-year-olds in science? 2-year-olds can do science too, and they may not have the same amount of language that a 3, a 4, or a 5-year-old might actually have, but the language that they do bring to it, that is their science, and that's what they're offering. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Gerald if you wanted to make any comment on that. Otherwise, I have some questions for you.
activity that we do with children with ramps. It looks like it's an expensive activity, but actually what we were able to do is Home Depot sells this cold molding that it's inexpensive plywood, and it's curved, so it's great for rolling marbles. And we went and talked to them, and they donated all the cold molding for us, and they cut it up into the different sizes. So a lot of times if you go to local places, lumber yards, or like Home Depot was great in Boston, and tell them what they're doing, and then we come back and we show them the videos and what the kids are doing. They get so excited, they want to contribute more. So a lot of these things, you can use recyclables. Our kids were very interested in one of the classrooms. The kids, on Monday, the garbage truck comes, so when they first come into class, it's the whole thing, oh, it smells so bad, and then they see this truck outside and hear all these noises, and then the garbage disappeared, so they wanted to know how the truck worked, because they were starting to look at machines and what's the garbage. So the teachers were talking about, what are the things that your family keeps and throws away, and how do they do it, and it becomes fascinating sorts of activities. So everything is really game, and it's not necessarily expensive. You can do things very inexpensively, and the kids get very excited. They don't want. I used to buy our kids fancy toys. All they want to do is take them apart and see how they work. So it's okay. Let's let them play with the pots and pans in the kitchen, bang them, and see what fits into what.
Play with the bats. I have a couple of questions here, but I just kind of wanted to look out in the audience. Does anyone have a question? Anybody else? For either of our panelists, for Kim or for Beth? Okay, you can even ask, how do I check out stuff from the museum? Go ahead.
That was really my question.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. That's a great question.
As far as the checking out, do you have to be does your school have to be in Chicago?
Nope. No, you can be anywhere in the Chicagoland area. In fact, we have schools from Indiana that borrow from the collection too.
You still pull up right here?
Yep, you still pull right up into the west lot. You just let them know you're there to pick up for the learning collection. It's right inside the west door. There's carts there. You come in, you get your stuff, you roll it out to your car, you're ready to go.
Do you pre-order this?
Yep. Yeah, so the picture I showed was the picture I showed was the online interface. So you can go on, you just create a member account for yourself, and then, or for your school, depending upon how you'd like to structure it. And then you can reserve the boxes that you want in advance and select your pickup day, and you come and pick it up. And then, again, depending upon the length of your loan, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, you bring it back, you can have something else queued up so you can pick it up right when you bring it to the system.
Daryl, I have a question that I think is for you, that I'm going to ask. It might be something that folks are thinking about around the room. The question is, how do you define early STEM or STEM in the early childhood classroom?
So it's really just sort of a notion of getting the kids to do stuff that they're already interested in learning about. So science is life science, the physical science, earth and space science. So the children want to know how their world works. So all of this is gained for science. The technology piece is the technology that's around the kids every day. So children now go into supermarkets and they scan things that reads the price. They stick their hands under water and the faucet turns on. They do crosswalks and the light turns and it's coordinated with the walk sign, and then it starts to count down. So there's a lot of technology that's happening in children's environments, and they want to know how this works. It's just a matter of taking advantage of it. And the math is really sort of a tool that can be used in helping to understand science, because what math does, it helps quantify the world for the kids. So you don't have to worry about, am I doing STEM? If you just draw on the kids' natural interests about the world around them, and you begin to think about how you can help the children understand what it is they're trying to learn about, and start to use the science language about what do you observe, what do you predict, let's experiment, in terms of questions, how do we answer these questions? As you saw, as some of the teachers in the videos, they're talking about comparing things and how things work, what the kids predict, and what do you think is going to be inside this toy when you take it apart. It's all STEM.
I know in early childhood, I think we like to think STEAM, right? Because we really like to make sure the arts are included, and it's a big part of us. And there was a comment, you know, as I think a powerful piece of Daryl's presentation that I hope you all can take back with you was the piece on how science is really integrated into all of the curricular areas that we're already doing and thinking about all the time. And one of them that was mentioned up there was creative arts. And sometimes we're thinking that we're using the arts to document maybe our science experiments, which Kim was talking about, you know, some of the kids were doing it for experiments. But I also really like to push people to think about, instead of the art table, it really is the science table, because much of the sometimes work that children are doing at the art table, perhaps, you know, roller painting with marble painting in a box, dealing with different kind of media and liquids and mixing things together is actually science. And so in addition to the conversations that we sometimes have with kids about how pretty their paintings look and what colors they're using, it's also really important to think about, well, what are those other questions that we might be asking them that might be related to those other pieces. So I see Mary's got her hand up and then someone else, so go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment on that. I've been really fascinated for some time in the whole idea of children drawing like a scientist. And what is extraordinary, I did something a couple years ago at the Center for New Horizons with 3- and 4-year-olds. And when we asked them to draw like a scientist and began by having them really observe something, we got drawings that were incredibly more sophisticated than, you know, if the kids were just sort of drawing. And I think it goes back to what you talked about in terms of this observation skill. We give kids something to look at, and when we have that focus, that is their focus, then they are able to really reproduce it, so.
Well, can I?
Yes, yes.
I think also it's this idea for early childhood teachers that, okay, 3. It's this idea that it's okay, that you need to be intentional, that it's okay to ask them to think about the parts that you see, to think about the colors that you see. Too often we feel like we're going against our roots if you don't just let them, you put out the colors and you say do whatever you want. And you know, and it isn't an either or. There's a time for that, and when you're drawing like a scientist, you need to make those observations.
Okay, go ahead.
About babies being introduced to the world. Now, what would be a good way to do that as far as science for children, ages 3 and 4?
Well, so 3 and 4.
Mommy is in pain and the baby is like, you know, about to be born, and then they come back to school and tell the whole class what they saw.
So 3 and 4-year-olds is what we were talking about today. But when you look at sort of young babies, the first thing they're trying to do is make sense out of their immediate world. So they want to know, like, how do their body parts work, and then they're kicking mobiles that are in their crib. And then if you give them objects to hold on to, so there's a normal sort of grasping reflex that kids have to grab objects. They'll hold things, they'll shake them, they'll learn about the properties. At some point they get the idea that something that's out of their reach, they can now grab. So
I think
they're being young scientists.
Are you asking about the preschoolers that come back after their
Babies?
moms have
Mom
babies?
said the stork brought the baby.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go to the museum and show them the pictures, but I don't think so. Not
Right.
Right. Well, I think that's a personal choice, I think, within the family. You know, I mean, some of it is like the magic, the ice magic. I mean,
Right.
and I think it's also answering the question the child is actually asking you.
Right.
You know, I had somebody ask me when I was pregnant, is it dark in there? Yeah.
I mean, we
And that's
tried
the
same
answer.
thing with the pumpkin and all of that.
Right. And that's, you know, and that's the answer. I mean, it's, because that gets into a very personal what parents want to describe as how that science happens. And I think there's also you can do a lot of comparing between you and your new baby. Do you have teeth? Does your baby have teeth? You know, because I think that comparison is such a big piece of what you have in comparison to whatever you're studying, the baby in this case?
Oh, well, I can't think of a better way to end a science and early childhood night with, how do you teach kids about how where babies
These come from, right?
But
You know, they always ask.
they sure do.
right.
That's why it's gonna be.
So I'm going to
Yay.
turn it back over to Rachel, who's going to give us some instructions on how to wrap things up. And on behalf of UIC and the College of Ed and the Illinois Government Public Affairs Unit, I want to say thank you so much for everyone who came.
Yes, thank
Thanks.
you. And thank you to Daryl for sharing all of this wonderful new efforts with us, and to Beth and Kim and Kathy for connecting us here.